Chapter 55, The End of Persistence. Chapter 55, The End of Persistence. It really wasn't a big deal. City patrol duty was a routine task, something that happened frequently. In fact, it was a rotational duty that could come up 3 or 4 times a month. And besides, where was this? Border Guard. A royal territory known for its impeccable security, where even minor trouble wasn't tolerated. It wasn't without reason that major trading companies considered it a prime location for their dealings. Although it was a border city in the far east of Norilia, bordering Aspen and located near battlefields, its security was unparalleled. This was thanks to the large number of stationed troops who worked tirelessly in shifts, day and night. Border Guard had a square at its center, marked by 4 inns surrounding a well. These inns formed a crossroads and a market square in the heart of the city. The city itself was built on a plateau. Leaving its outskirts, one could see gentle slopes descending below, with a river flowing beneath the northern incline. The Penhaniel River. It provided water to most of the surrounding towns. Along the riverbanks were farmlands, scattered with occasional farmhouses. This past summer, the river had flooded, breaking one side of the embankment. Workers were now busy rebuilding the structure. Most incidents occurred between people. Although patrols occasionally dealt with farmland inspections or magical creatures, today's duty was market patrol. "I'm Jack, and this is Bo," one soldier said. Patrols were conducted in groups of 3, so 2 soldiers joined the team. Ingrid, Jack, and Bo, this was the trio heading toward the market. "That mist was sorcery? Damn it, I almost died because of those Aspen bastards, but I survived thanks to you." "Much appreciated." Jack spat on the ground as he spoke. Holding a standard-issue infantry spear, he swaggered as if his gratitude wasn't entirely sincere. Ingrid nodded nonchalantly. "I almost died without spending my saved krona." Bo also expressed his gratitude. He seemed like a particularly cheerful soldier. Big Eyes had once mentioned that Bo was quite talented. This combination seems familiar somehow. But no particular memory surfaced. Since it wasn't significant, Ingrid didn't try to recall it. The 3 of them walked toward the market in good spirits. Ingrid wasn't much of a talker, but Jack and Bo were in the same squad. As they chatted, they occasionally praised Ingrid. "A high-rank soldier, huh? You must be really skilled. Damn, let's spar sometime. I'd love to see what a senior soldier is capable of." Jack tapped the ground with the butt of his spear as he spoke. "Sure." Ingrid didn't refuse sparring. He believed every duel, no matter the opponent, had something to teach. "You promised, damn it." Jack punctuated his words with a customary curse. "I heard you succeeded in a reconnaissance mission too." Squad leader Andrew couldn't stop singing your praises, Bo chimed in, lifting Ingrid up even more. "Just got lucky." "Modest, too," Bo said, giving him a thumbs up. No one disliked compliments, and Ingrid was no exception. The 2 chatted incessantly, laughing as they walked. Reaching the market's edge, they passed several single-story buildings before entering the market itself. On one side, someone was selling wildflowers they had picked, while on the other, tanned leather goods were for sale. From the opposite side of the market, where Ingrid had entered, the faint clang of metal being struck echoed in the air. It came from a blacksmith shop. Although located on the outskirts of the market, the sound of iron meeting iron faintly stimulated the ears. "No, if you sell it for that price, there's nothing left to profit." A merchant's voice rang out. "Freshly baked bread here." A boy standing by the roadside called out, inviting people to his stall. Rumble, rumble. Carts moved through the market center. It was chaotic, as markets usually were. The bustling scene was familiar. "Dried apples taste great," one merchant said. Ingrid's eyes met those of a vendor selling various dried fruits. "No thanks," Ingrid replied. The merchant quickly turned away. It was an ordinary day. Once the patrol was over, maybe he could convince Jackson to spar, or he could spend time with Jack instead. It might be fun. The weather had grown noticeably colder, stiffening his body. Walking felt better than staying still. "Should we walk a bit more?" Yes, Jack and Bo replied, sticking close on either side of him. Just as Ingrid wondered if they were huddling together because of the cold, a child in tattered rags stumbled and fell forward. Ingrid instinctively caught the child. Thud. A searing pain followed. He tried to twist his body immediately, but the cold had stiffened him, delaying his reaction. Had the dagger struck at a slight angle, it might have been bearable. Instead, it pierced his organs without hesitation. After stabbing his insides, the blade unerringly aimed for his heart, delivering another blow. An excruciating pain surged through his mind. As the dagger struck, a cry or groan was about to escape his lips when someone behind him covered his mouth with thick fabric. The market was busy. Even if someone staggered and fell, it was barely noticed. Jack and Bo hid Ingrid with their bodies. Whoops, had a bit too much to drink so early, huh? Jack joked. Exactly, Bo agreed, matching his tone. What the hell is going on? Ingrid couldn't make sense of the series of events. The final punctuation was delivered by the child who had stabbed his abdomen and heart. A persistent lover never forgets. It wasn't a child. Beneath the rags were large ears and jewel-like eyes. The features were peculiar. One eye was green, shining like a gemstone, while the other was brown, dull by comparison. It was a heterochromatic gaze. The green eye was so clear that the brown eye seemed exceedingly murky, like dirty oil mixed into clean water. Their skin was mottled like a spotted cat, with deep wrinkles around the mouth and eyes. Although the facial features were quite attractive individually, together they gave off an unsettling impression. A mixed blood fairy. Ingrid recognized the figure's identity, but that changed nothing. Blood streamed onto the ground while his mouth remained gagged. His arms were pinned, and Jack and Bo offered no gaps to exploit. Farewell, the mixed blood fairy said. Judging by the wrinkles on their face and the tone of their speech, they weren't young. Their small build resembled that of a boy around 12 or 13 years old. This? I really didn't expect this. An assassination attempt? And a persistent lover? Wasn't that the name of Aspin's independent unit? Rumored to be relentless, they had sent assassins after the war. They're utterly insane. The resources and effort required to send an assassin were substantial. Targeting a mere soldier for such a purpose was madness. From the perspective of the victim, it was infuriating. As Ingrid tried to tilt his head backward, the person gagging him tightened their grip. Let him go. He seems to have something to say, the fairy said. Perhaps it was an elven intuition, but the diminutive, aged, mixed-blood elf seemed to have read Ingrid's intentions. The thick fabric strangling his neck loosened. Did Aspen send you? Are you, Jack and Bo, spies? Ingrid swallowed the sharp pain crawling up his body and asked. Something like that. Who's the behind me? Why do you care? You're dying anyway. I'd hate to die ignorant. I'll be waiting for you in hell. Rotten. The last word was whispered behind him. Rotten? That bastard's name was familiar. Jack, Bo, Rotten. Weren't they all from the reconnaissance team? As death loomed closer, his mind spun wildly, dredging up old memories. The reason he'd been sent on that reconnaissance mission during the Green Pearl battlefield. Jack had claimed a broken arm, Bo a smashed nose, and Rotten had supposedly been bitten by a snake. All of them had faked their way out of the mission. Those bastards. A bitter laugh escaped him. Persistent, weren't they? The fairy spoke before slipping aside like a shadow. The figure darted nimbly toward the outskirts and disappeared into an alley. Jack and Bo, who had been holding him down, quietly let go and moved away. Rotten? Needless to say, he was already gone. Ingrid used up all his strength exchanging just a few words. He didn't even have the energy to shout. Not that he would have, even if he could. Instead, he collapsed, trying to catch a glimpse behind him. Rotten, they'd said. But what if it was someone else? How did Rotten even look? He couldn't remember his face. As the thought struck him that it didn't matter, Ingrid let his body go limp. Blood dripped from his mouth, and his insides felt like they'd been churned with kindling. Pain soaked his body, blood the ground beneath him. The chill wrapped around him even tighter. His body shivered violently. Bastards, if you're leaving, at least finish the job. Bleeding out like this was the worst. Better to die in one swift blow. Ah! A passing waitress screamed at the sight of the blood pooling on the ground. That was the last thing he heard. Ingrid closed his eyes and welcomed death. A flash. Morning greeted him as his eyes opened again. He shot upright, startling Rem, who was bundled in blankets nearby. Nightmare. No. Just wanted to start the day with some energy. It's disgustingly cold. I.M. grumbled from the moment he woke. Though a large bonfire blazed in the camp's parade ground and the night guards brought in heated stones for the soldiers, it wasn't enough to stave off the cold. If they had an abundance of krona, they might have bought furs or magical heaters. But such luxuries were out of reach for ordinary soldiers. Not that they needed a magical heater. Even a beast's hide, said to emit a subtle warmth, would have been enough. But even that was an expensive dream. To sum up, all of it was wishful thinking. Kreis, aren't you cold? Freezing. Absolutely freezing. I.M. asked Kreis for no reason. Big Eyes was the only one here with an abundance of krona. How about a magical heater? Do you think we can use something nobles have? You're dreaming. Why don't you try becoming a noble tomorrow instead? Oh? Are you asking for a blow from my axe? Resorting to violence every time isn't a good habit. Squad leader. Big Eyes ended the conversation by calling out to Incrid. Don't bully him. Incrid's gaze shifted to Audin Pumray, the burly soldier in their squad with a religious streak. For some reason, he'd ended up in this squad of misfits. Today was exceptionally cold. Jackson was out on leave for some reason, while I.M., Big Eyes, and Ragnar showed no intention of getting out of bed. Even bundled in blankets, it was cold. Since you're up, squad leader, could you bring us some warm stones? The heated stones left by the bonfire overnight would help somewhat. Sure. Despite his answer, Incrid didn't move. Instead, Audin stepped out of his bed and approached I.M. with long strides. Brother, staying in bed because it's cold will make your body stiff. Moving to generate heat is how you defeat the cold. Come on, follow me. Get lost before I warm my body with your blood after chopping you to pieces. That's not a good attitude, brother. Someone might find that offensive. Offended? Good. That's what I was going for. Do you wish to go to heaven, brother? Ever consistent, wasn't he? Normally, Incrid would have stopped him by now. But today, he just stared at Audin and spoke. You mentioned a training method to preserve body heat. Teach me. Audin, who'd been staring at REM intently, turned back to him. You mean the unarmed training method? Audin probably wasn't immune to the cold either. But he was undoubtedly better at enduring it than the rest of them. He'd once mentioned a training method to keep the body from freezing up in the cold. For some reason, Incrid recalled it now. It seemed useful. Jumping in place to stay warm wasn't practical. Learning a method to prevent his body from stiffening sounded like a good idea. It was impulsive yet logical. Incrid was always eager to learn. Yeah, that. Teaching it is easy. Do you have time? Now. You can grasp the basics in a day or two. It's not hard. Audin smiled, seeming pleased that Incrid wanted to learn. As Incrid prepared to start immediately, REM mumbled from his bed. Squad leader, bring the stones first. I'm cold. Oh, right. Incrid fetched the stones first. They had 2 hours before the shift. Enough time for breakfast and some training. Incrid did just that. The unarmed training method was grueling but effective. Afterward, he went on duty again. How did I end up on shift with those two? Clearly, someone had meddled. What an honor. Standing guard with the spell breaker himself. Jack replied, and Incrid nodded. When they entered the marketplace, Incrid was already prepared. He noticed the fairy approaching before anyone else. Jack and Bo tried to grab his arms, but Incrid struck out with his fists on either side. Thunk, crack. Jack took a hit to the chin, while Bo dodged reflexively, sidestepping quickly. Bo was fast. He stepped back and reached for his waist, where a short sword hung. The fairy was still far away. That meant Bo had to be dealt with first. Incrid gripped the hilt of his long sword. Drawing it, he swung, sharpening his senses and boldness into a blade. At that moment, whoosh! He heard a strange sound. He tried to dodge, but whatever was flying at him was faster. Thud! Incrid's breath caught. He looked down to see the tip of a blade protruding from his chest, near his heart. It was a throwing knife, no hilt, no decorations, just a double-edged blade. An exceptionally difficult weapon to master. A persistent lover never forgets his prey. The fairy, now close, whispered before stepping back. I was prepared. But he hadn't anticipated a thrown weapon. Even if he had, it would have been difficult to block such skilled precision. Ingrid closed his eyes, thinking he'd need better preparations. And thus, his third day began. Chapter 56, 56, A Wall is a Wall. Chapter 56, A Wall is a Wall. Think of it as stretching your muscles, brother, Audin said. Audin's behanded training method was all about isolating and stretching each muscle in the body. A groan involuntarily escaped Ingrid's lips as the muscles at the back of his thighs felt like they were about to snap. To make matters worse, Audin climbed onto Ingrid's bent back, adding more pressure. In a seated position, Ingrid stretched his hands down to his toes and muttered, "Just die." "Is that a threat?" "I'm saying I'm going to die." His voice was barely above a whisper, as though the strain on his body would genuinely tear his muscles apart. Just as he felt he might pass out, Audin finally got off his back. "This is just the basics," Audin repeated multiple times. He bent one leg inward, pressed against his hip muscles, and used a nearby column to twist his body as he leaned halfway down. He twisted, stretched, and wrung his body. Yes, wrung was the perfect word. Like wringing out laundry, every movement squeezed his body. Afterward, sweat drenched him completely. Wasn't this some form of torture? If this was just the basics, would the advanced training involve dismantling a person entirely? Such thoughts briefly crossed his mind, but the results were undeniable. The exercises Audin taught were incredibly effective. Though painful during the process, his body felt significantly lighter afterward. Not just lighter, his entire body felt energized. His heart pounded, circulating warmth throughout him. Even the cold became bearable. Eat well, rest well, and move well. That's how you endure the cold, brother squad leader, Audin said with a smile. Ingrid nodded. Physical training was just another part of his daily life. An enduring physical strain sharpened his mind. A clearer mind brought focus, leading him back to the thought of the assassin who had come to kill him in the repeated day. That technique. He hadn't even seen how the throwing knife was launched. Ingrid considered himself skilled at throwing knives, but not even close. The assassin's skill was exceptional. But it was still manageable. Their first pattern involved approaching and stabbing. If that failed, they threw knives. For a wall, it's thin and low, he thought. The ferryman of the Black River often said that walls will keep appearing in Ingrid's path. If it's this much, it seemed easy. That confidence was why he could take his time. Look at this. Difficult? This? Suddenly, Rem leapt off his bed and perfectly replicated one of Ingrid's movements. With smooth, unhindered motions, his body extended effortlessly. His flexibility was remarkable. Learn some flexibility, will you? That bastard was insufferable, as usual. This is hard for you? Really? Rem kept mocking him, but Ingrid chose to ignore him entirely. Half-lidded, he observed Rem's antics when Ragnar, who had been silently watching, finally moved. Ragnar was also a natural when it came to using his body. Mastering swordsmanship beyond a certain level required a complete understanding of one's body, and Ragnar demonstrated that mastery perfectly. He deliberately performed the same movements Ingrid struggled with, adding a touch of arrogance to his flawless execution. Have you developed a hobby of twisting your body? Jackson, who had just returned from outside, entered and commented. From his perspective, this was a den of madmen. Ingrid, drenched in sweat, caught his breath. In front of him, a mad savage was bending over and touching their toes with a grinning face, while a slacker sat casually with their legs split open. Had they all lost their minds together? We're learning exercises to endure the cold, brother, Audin explained. Jackson showed no interest, sidestepping them to reach his spot. As it was time for Ingrid's shift, he stood up and asked a question purely out of curiosity. The dagger the assassin used had an unusual design. Have you ever used a throwing dagger shaped like this? What's that? Nope. Never, brother. As he described the dagger without a handle, meant for throwing, Ragnar, and Audin voiced their ignorance. Naturally, Big Eye said nothing, while Jackson frowned slightly. Where did you see that? The dagger? Jackson asked, still standing. He hadn't even taken off his coat yet. I didn't see it exactly, Ingrid replied. He was about to see it again soon. Did it have a round groove near the hilt? Jackson inquired further, coat still in hand. Yeah. He didn't have to think hard, the image was vivid in his mind after being struck by the blade in the repeated day. A round groove at the end, it had been there. Why do you ask? REM questioned as he crawled back into bed. Just something I heard about, Jackson said, turning away. At that moment, a black panther with striking blue eyes emerged from Ingrid's bed. The creature had spent the night curled up beside him, finally waking. It was a creature that seemed to adore both beds and sleep. Still shivering from the cold, it stretched out its body from head to tail. Ingrid ran his hand along its back, from its head to the tip of its tail, when Jackson spoke up. Avoid it if possible. That's called a whistle blade. A whistle blade. The name was unfamiliar. It's nicknamed for the sound it makes when thrown. Assassins favor it. Hard to wield, but if you meet someone skilled with it, well, run. Jackson's tone, as always, was cold but considerate. The problem was the content. Run? It's just a dagger, after all. The panther let out a pleased purring sound as Ingrid scratched it. When Big Eyes tried to pet it, the panther immediately bared its fangs in a vicious snarl. Fine, fine. I get it, Big Eyes said, backing off. Any closer, and the panther would have bitten him for sure. Initially, Ingrid had worried the panther might harm his squad, but those fears quickly dissipated. No matter how agile the panther was, it couldn't possibly handle someone like REM or the others. Big Eyes just needed to be cautious, though the panther seemed unusually intelligent. After spending a few days with it, there were no issues. Ingrid gently stroked its head and said, "Don't hate him too much. I'll be back after my shift." Ingrid rose from his seat. "Continue your unarmed training exercises. They'll be helpful, brother." He didn't specify what they would help with, but it wasn't hard to figure out. What was Ingrid always immersed in? The sword. It was clear he meant it would benefit swordsmanship. Not wrong, REM nodded. Ragnar and Jackson also followed with subtle nods. When it came to Ingrid, their reactions were always earnest. It was a curious thing. They usually didn't care about much else. Ingrid stepped out of the barracks for his duties. He thought it would be the same routine as usual and relatively easy, but Jackson's words complicated his thoughts. Evade? Run away? With his current abilities? Even if he fought head-on? He should have asked more questions. No, he would find out soon enough by trying. The cost would be his life and the day itself. But there would be gains as well. It wouldn't be a waste. Even after facing death countless times, Ingrid never let any day pass meaninglessly. Even on days sacrificed out of necessity. In such situations, he always aimed to gain something, no matter how small. This repeated resolve had shaped an instinct within him. That instinct whispered now. That strange-looking half-blood fairy assassin would not be an easy opponent. Ah, high-ranked soldier, the spell breaker. Jack always brought a light-heartedness to the atmosphere, making the mood more relaxed. If he hadn't known better, it might have worked. But knowing the intention behind it, it was clear. It was a calculated move. Excessive flattery to inflate egos and disarm vigilance. When I see it this way, he's rather meticulous. An assassin targeting an ordinary soldier like this? Was he a perfectionist? As thoughts of the half-blood fairy's face swirled in his mind, trying to gauge his personality, Ingrid arrived at the market. Wow, it's disgustingly crowded, Jack quipped as he approached from one side, closing the distance. Yeah, it is, Ingrid replied, spotting a ragged figure moving toward them from the front. Suddenly, Ingrid spread his arms wide. Thud! Once again, Jack took the blow, while Bo dodged. Ingrid deftly twisted his body aside. His muscles were stiff from the cold, but Odin's exercises had helped. He wasn't as rigid as he was on his first day. Without even drawing his sword, Ingrid grabbed Bo by the collar. Bo reflexively threw a punch. With the boldness granted by the heart of the beast, Ingrid predicted its trajectory by following it to the end and tilted his head to dodge. Tick! The fist grazed his earlobe. Then it was Ingrid's turn. Strengthening his grip on Bo's collar, he twisted, choking off his breath. Urk! Bo groaned. Hup! Ingrid inhaled sharply, spinning Bo to use him as a human shield. Despite his light frame, the weight of an armed adult man bore down on his arms. He lifted and twisted his waist, utilizing centrifugal force to swing Bo. As he pulled Bo halfway around, Ingrid's eyes caught the half-blood fairy throwing off his rags. The moment their gazes locked, the fairy seemed to smirk. Why in this situation? Ingrid had just secured a human shield, after all. The fairy should have been alarmed. The target had anticipated and reacted to the assassin's setup. Yet, the half-blood fairy remained composed. Smirking, he merely waved his hand. The instant his dangling hand reached his chest, it happened. A flash of light. Lightning. A dagger flew with speed invisible to the naked eye. The assassin's hand had barely touched his chest before the blade launched forward. Before Ingrid could even position Bo as a shield, the dagger struck near his heart. Fweet! The delayed sound of the whistle pierced his ears. A thud followed by intense pain conveyed what had just transpired. The assassin had thrown a dagger and it had pierced his heart. So, that's how it is. His instincts had been right. The enemy wasn't ordinary. Just the skill in throwing that dagger was enough to say so. But what if he prevented the enemy from throwing more daggers? Even with a dagger lodged in his body, the only thing bystanders perceived was two soldiers fighting. Let go of me! Bo shouted, kicking Ingrid in the stomach. The grip on his collar loosened. Ingrid had taken a hit to the abdomen and released Bo. A dagger lodged in his heart, it was strange he could still move. Blood welled up and spilled from his mouth. As he fell to one knee, barely holding himself upright, the half-blood fairy approached. You expected this, didn't you? Was their acting that bad? Even as screams erupted around them, the half-blood fairy paid no mind. To him, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. Why? Ingrid asked, saving his last breath. Despite the chaos, the assassin heard him clearly. Why ask? Because I'm curious. It seemed like you knew and reacted accordingly. Ingrid nodded faintly, gathering his last strength. The acting was awful. Even a stray dog would have laughed. The fairy nodded and flicked his hand sideways. Thunk! Two daggers flew at close range. Ingrid caught sight of their blades embedded in Jack and Bo's foreheads. Two grooves, whistling blades, whistle daggers. What? What? Neither could finish their sentences as they collapsed backward. The half-blood fairy stopped there, sparing any further action. Ingrid knew Rotten was nearby. But Rotten didn't rush in during such situations. He was probably hiding somewhere. The half-blood fairy didn't bother with Rotten, for now. Perhaps he'd chase him down once this was over. Either way, it didn't concern Ingrid anymore. The persistent lover never lets prey escape. At those words, Ingrid nodded. True. Aren't you surprised? Should I be? Well, most would be. Sorry, but this is my third time already. Instead of showing surprise, Ingrid grabbed the dagger stuck in his chest and pulled it out. Schlick! As the blade left his heart, a wave of excruciating pain followed. Blood gushed out from the gaping wound. Ingrid's vision quickly blurred, and the assassin remarked, "You're an interesting one." Is that so? I'll make things even more interesting. As he closed his eyes, Ingrid thought to himself. With darkness came the sight of the ferryman. Keek. The ferryman cackled without saying much, seemingly amused. His features, his eyes, nose, and mouth were indiscernible, as was his form, but the sense he conveyed was unmistakable. The ferryman's laughter was brief. Darkness receded, and a new morning dawned. Good morning. Ingrid shot up, grabbed Audin, and quickly learned some exercises before catching sight of Jackson returning. Without hesitation, he seized Jackson's sleeve and dragged him outside. The moment Jackson felt his sleeve grabbed, he almost pushed away, but stopped when he realized it was his squad leader. Eh? Where are we going? I.M. called from behind. I have some questions. Jackson, nicknamed the Merchant of Equivalent Exchange, surprisingly knew a lot. While Big Eyes was knowledgeable about general information, more critical insights often came through Jackson. The nickname stemmed from his knack for trading information, always giving and expecting something in return. You know whistle daggers, right? Jackson furrowed his brow. Where did you hear about those? Observing Jackson's reaction, Ingrid concluded the whistle daggers weren't ordinary items. Tell me about them. Is this a trade? This wasn't Jackson the soldier now, but Jackson the merchant of equivalent exchange. Yes. The cost didn't matter. This conversation would vanish when the day repeated. Chapter 57, Soundless Blade. Chapter 57, Soundless Blade. After seeing it, he wanted it. It was a sudden question, but Jackson wasn't the type to get flustered. As always, his expression remained stoic. For a brief moment, Jackson seemed ready to speak but hesitated. He appeared to be mulling something over. Ingrid stood quietly with his arms at his sides, waiting for Jackson to open his mouth. There was no point in rushing him. The hesitation didn't last long. Soon, Jackson exhaled, a puff of white breath dispersing into the cold air. Whistle dagger. It was once known as the Soundless Blade, Jackson began, scratching his cheek as he spoke. Considering his initial hesitation, his explanation flowed smoothly. The Soundless Blade, it's a weapon so fast that only the sound is left behind. It moves faster than the human eye can follow, making it difficult to deal with. Most victims die without even knowing what struck them. That's what the whistle dagger is. And if someone had to face it, was there a way to avoid an assassin? Probably not. It didn't seem like it. The assassin was meticulous in their preparations. They had exploited spies planted within Ingrid's allies and executed their plans with precision. At least, that's how it looked to Ingrid for now. He was bound, hands and feet shackled, forced to move wherever his captors pulled him. It was time to figure out how to escape. If someone had to. Jackson tilted his head, as if the question itself was strange. Yes, if they had to, Ingrid repeated, emphasizing the point. Jackson stared intently into Ingrid's eyes. Blue eyes met reddish-brown ones, their gazes clashing in midair. It felt like Jackson was silently asking, why would you even need to know this? Ingrid ignored the unspoken question. Jackson was someone who traded in necessary information, not someone who asked why of his clients. Eventually, Jackson's expression hardened, and he said, this information won't come cheap. The more expensive, the better, Ingrid replied earnestly. After all, today wasn't likely to be the last day of his life. If the morning came and this knowledge turned out to be something Ingrid already knew, its value would plummet to nothing, at least, to him. Jackson's face grew more serious, as if his mood had soured. Ingrid ignored that, too. Jackson's feelings weren't the priority right now. You need to watch their hand movements before you hear the sound. Everything hinges on how they move their hand, Jackson explained concisely. Don't be fooled by the sound. By the time you hear it, it's already too late. You have to keep your eyes on the enemy's movements. You can't lose sight of them for even a moment. Especially if the opponent is a top-tier assassin, they'll know how to throw without being seen. The whistle dagger's defining characteristic was its paper-thin blade. The blade was sharpened to such an extent that it could pierce even steel breastplates under the right circumstances. In the hands of a skilled user, it could even penetrate thick armor. Some experts layered multiple thin blades to amplify its lethality, Jackson added. Jackson explained that there were two primary ways to throw a dagger. One method involved a wide swing to maximize power. The other focused on concealing the throw entirely. You've seen me throw daggers before, right? Ingrid asked. Throwing daggers was a skill he'd once trained in obsessively. Yes, it was on the level of throwing rocks, Jackson replied bluntly, dismissing Ingrid's skill with a single remark. He might as well have said that throwing actual rocks would be more effective. Rocks might at least deal some damage, unlike Ingrid's daggers, which barely hit their mark. Harsh, Ingrid thought. Even though Ingrid was used to brushing off criticism, Jackson's words were sharp enough to cut through his indifference. It wasn't quite like taking a dagger to the heart, but it felt like one had lodged itself somewhere in his arm. Then teach me properly. How to throw them, Ingrid muttered, slightly annoyed. Fine, let's do that. I'll add it to the trade list, Jackson replied. Don't want to. Ingrid didn't dislike the idea. He was always hungry for knowledge, and this offer was like an oasis in the desert. Thirsty as ever, Ingrid nodded. No, I want to. Start with how to hold it. With the patrol shift approaching, their lesson was brief, barely half an hour. In that short time, Ingrid found himself reassessing Jackson. Without practice, this won't mean much, Jackson said, teaching him how to grip and throw blades of various weights, thin knives, hand axes, and heavier daggers. Each weapon required a different grip and throwing technique. Once again, Ingrid realized how much there was to learn. As he turned to resume his patrol, Jackson spoke. His voice was small but firm. Don't create situations where you have to face them. That's the first step. After treating him with subtle irritation the entire time, Jackson ended with a note of concern. For a moment, Ingrid wondered what he had ever done for people like Jackson, Rem, and Ragnar to make them act this way. Why are they so kind to me, without reason? They weren't romantically involved, nor did he think of them as deep friends. Yet their behavior felt like they were looking after a child by the water's edge. No, that's not quite it. They never insisted on following him to the battlefield, after all. It was a fleeting thought. Sure, Ingrid muttered. In truth, he had no intention of avoiding such situations. Some battles couldn't be avoided, no matter how much one wished to. Was it you on patrol today? I heard you got promoted to high-ranked soldier. Hey, congrats! It was Jack, accompanied by Bo. Let's go, Ingrid said. And so, he plunged once more into the waves of today. The biting cold wind howled, but he was dressed in one more layer than yesterday, as if wrapped in cloth armor. The extra clothing, coupled with the exercises Odin had taught him, kept him warmer. The cold didn't feel as harsh anymore. I won't sell it for that price. The same scene played out in the bustling market. Ingrid had grown accustomed to using the leather merchant's angry shout as a marker. Right about now, the rag-cloaked half-elf would make their appearance. At the same time, Jack and Bodo closed in on either side of him. Ingrid had no intention of letting the day slip by aimlessly. Of course, he had plans. With a quick motion, he tripped Jack's foot with his left. What? Jack stumbled forward. The moment Jack fell, Ingrid drew his sword from his right hip, a broad, sturdy blade known as a guard sword. Its thick, wide blade could double as a shield. Geeing, COG arc. Crazy! Bo shouted in surprise from the side, and rightly so. The wide blade of Ingrid's drawn dagger cleanly severed Jack's neck. GRRK. There wasn't even a proper death cry. Jack, his throat severed, collapsed face first onto the ground, clutching his neck as he writhed. Blood pooled on the floor. Those who saw Jack's collapsed body screamed. KR! Uwa! The crowd of merchants instinctively backed away. No one wanted to die by a stray blade. Meanwhile, Bo flinched. However, Ingrid didn't give Bo the chance to move. The wide blade in Ingrid's hand moved again. A strike aimed downward at Bo's collarbone. Clang! You bastard! Bo swiftly drew his dagger to block. The weapon had a thin blade, clearly designed for thrusting. If things had gone according to plan, Bo likely would have stabbed Ingrid's side with it. Ingrid pushed down on the dagger he blocked, forcing Bo to retreat backward. Without missing a beat, Ingrid bought himself time and shifted his body, guarding his chest near his heart with the broad blade. All of this unfolded in just 2 breaths. Without preparation, such an encounter would have left anyone too flustered to react. Up to this point, everything had gone as planned. Ingrid's gaze fixed on the assassin. The man threw back the rags covering his head. A bizarre, discomforting appearance came into view. His eyes glimmered with curiosity and excitement. Then, it began again. Forget sound, focus on movement. Ingrid shut out the noise and focused every fiber of his being on his sight. He predicted his opponent's next move based on the visual information in front of him. It was a countermeasure Jackson had taught him. Thud! Ingrid assumed his enemy would naturally aim for his heart. If not there, then his head. With his focus razor-sharp, he could almost see the light reflecting off the assassin's blade as it moved. However, he couldn't see where the blade would ultimately land. Thus, he guarded his heart and turned his head aside. Instead, the assassin's whistling throwing knife embedded itself in his right forearm. A burning pain surged as his forearm muscle tore, rendering his fingers powerless. His nerves were damaged, making it impossible to recover without divine healing, a grievous wound. Heh! A hollow chuckle escaped his lips. It was a strike he hadn't anticipated. Protecting his heart, the assassin instead targeted his arm. The goal wasn't to pierce the shield but to deal with the one holding it. A novel perspective. This isn't some amateur assassin. The realization etched itself further into his mind. Wee-eyeing. The second whistling blade struck, embedding itself in his heart. Was this assassin harboring some deep grudge against frogs? It seemed he wouldn't rest until he lodged a dagger in a heart. Gah! Blood filled his cough. A crimson tide gushed out, spilling over. Down on both knees, propped up only by his left arm, Ingrid saw a shadow loom over him. You're an amusing one. A persistent lover never lets his prey. Get away. Ingrid, summoning every ounce of his strength, interrupted the assassin. Raising his head, he met the gaze of the half-blood fairy. The man's face was frozen in shock, his lips quivering as if unable to process the interruption. Finally, he blurted out a single incredulous word. You? Surprised? Of course, you'd be. You always acted like you predicted everything. Watching your expression crumble like this was satisfying. Ingrid felt content. See you again. The assassin wouldn't remember, but Ingrid would. From today, he'd remember and meet him again. The assassin recoiled at Ingrid's words. Was this a trap? The half-blood fairy looked around. Hiring a first-class assassin just to kill a mere soldier? It seemed excessive. If it were a trap, it would make sense. The idea that Ingrid had some trick up his sleeve, planning to survive, came to mind. Of course, it was all a misconception. There was no trap. With a sickening thud, Ingrid's head slumped. Another day ended. The ferryman appeared again, smirking mockingly as always. Does this bastard have nothing better to do? Ingrid thought bitterly as he welcomed the same day once more. It's damn cold. From the early morning, REM's grumbling echoed. Move around and warm yourself up. It'll help. Ingrid stole the words right out of Audin's mouth and said them first. Then he stood and began loosening his body. A body warmed by light exercise always performed better than one left stiff. That was certain. In that sense, Audin's stretches were certainly useful. After finishing his warm-up, Audin approached him. Where did you learn that? From you, of course. But he couldn't admit that outright. From a traveling priest. Audin had once mentioned that the origins of these exercises lay in the temples. Specifically, it was a method used by monks who trained in unarmed and weapon combat as part of their discipline. You learned it well. Audin chimed in, joining the stretching session again. When it's cold, isn't it better to just wrap yourself in a blanket? Why don't you fetch us some heated stones? A squad leader should take care of his men's warmth, don't you think? Ingrid playfully bantered back at REM's grumbling. Before long, Jackson returned. Let's talk. Jackson abruptly took Ingrid aside. Where are you going without me? REM's whining echoed in the background. I want to learn how to use whistling blades. One thing Ingrid had realized from living this repeating day was that it was better to simply state what he wanted outright rather than trying to be cunning. Where did you hear about that? You pick up things when wandering around. I want to learn it. What's your price? Anything you want. I'll even sign a blank check. A famous merchant guild occasionally issued promissory notes, but none were as legendary as those issued by the Rengardis Merchant Guild. The head of the Rengardis Guild, after losing his only son to a monster extermination expedition, had issued a blank check to the Imperial Knights who saved his son. The story became a metaphor, symbolizing a willingness to give anything except one's life. Jackson furrowed his brows. That's not something to say lightly. I mean it. Ingrid's response carried weight. He was serious. He craved the half-blood fairies throwing knives. He wanted to learn their use. The desire burned within him. Jackson looked into Ingrid's eyes and nodded. Within them, he saw flames of unrelenting desire, ready to destroy and consume anything in their path. Chapter 58, Once he possessed it, he could see clearly. Chapter 58, Once he possessed it, he could see clearly. There was a time when even the act of desiring something was forbidden in his life. Dreams were dreamed, and hopes were harbored, but knowing they could never be achieved, life was merely a struggle. Such was Ingrid's life. But not anymore. Now, he could reveal his desires and pursue them. In fact, doing so was an advantage in this moment. After warming up his body with some exercises, it was time for a short lesson from Jackson on how to throw a dagger. I want to learn more. You seemed like a complete novice, Jackson muttered after watching Ingrid throw a dagger. Ingrid replied nonchalantly, I saw someone do this on the battlefield and learned by observing. Jackson stared at him with a blank expression. Believe me, it's true. Is that so? Of course. Geniuses can do these things, can't they? During his life as a dullard, Ingrid had witnessed countless so-called geniuses and talented individuals perform such feats. Now, he simply pretended to be one of them. This pretense of being a genius was something he could manage, as it was a part of repeating today over and over again. Revealing one's desires worked to his advantage because it meant maintaining such an attitude. What is a genius, after all? Geniuses are those who recognize what they need to seize and express their desires without hesitation. And above all, Ingrid's desire to learn was genuine. In terms of the sheer will to learn, Ingrid was unrivaled on the continent. Very well. As always, Jackson's decision was swift. After a brief moment of deliberation, he taught with sincerity. It was quite an enjoyable session. Ingrid repeated the methods of gripping and throwing the dagger. In a short amount of time, sweat drenched him. You mentioned you have a shift, didn't you? It's fine. After all, this was just light exercise, not overexertion. And so, today began anew. More precisely, it was the 7th iteration of today. Instead of walking between Jack and Bo, Ingrid took the far left position. I need to walk on the far left. It's a superstition of mine. When Ingrid insisted, what could they do? Jack and Bo had no objections. If you say so. That's unusual. Well, walk wherever you feel comfortable. Though the sweat had quickly cooled, the warmth inside his body remained. Despite being the 7th repetition of today, the air felt strangely different. The sun pierced through the cold wind and touched his skin. The chirping of winter birds brushed against his ears. The sensation of soil underfoot and the resonance of the earth with every step was pleasant. The air, the ground, the soil, the wind. Everything wrapped around him, brushed against him, warmed him, lingered momentarily, and then flowed away. The sky was clear. Even in the biting chill of winter, the 4th season of the year, as it heralded the end of a cycle with its bone-piercing winds. That very wind brought more freshness than coldness. Though today was a repetition, Ingrid had always endured it with intensity. Yet today, for some reason, he felt a little more relaxed. Peace seemed to envelop him. Not that he had forgotten the intensity required. He simply felt comfortable. The path he walked, this moment, everything was. Why do I feel so at ease? He didn't know. Even though he was aware of his impending death. The agony, the moment when he would have to struggle against death, was drawing near. Dying never became familiar, no matter how many times it happened. Throwing is instantaneous. Before that, relax your entire body. Let it go limp and focus in a state of calm. It's not easy, Jackson had said. He was only half right. It was indeed difficult, but it wasn't impossible. It was challenging, but doable. Courage, the gift of the heart of the beast, was the reason for this capability. Courage allowed him to confront death and observe everything to the very end. And pinpoint focus allowed him to perceive the same situations in entirely new ways. The combination of courage and focus brought Ingrid to the brink of talent. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have attained such courage or focus, but in his current state, he had both threads to hold on to. I can do this. With just a few lessons and repetitions. A mere 3 or 4 practice sessions were enough to ingrain it into his body. Luck played a significant role. Under normal circumstances, even countless repetitions wouldn't have sufficed, yet he grasped it effortlessly. That fragile thread was a source of immense joy for Ingrid. An unprecedented sense of elation. Are you all right? Bo asked beside him. With his vacant expression and random grinning, he probably didn't look fine. At least he wasn't drooling. I'm fine. Sorry for the unsightly display. Ingrid wiped his mouth for no reason and kept walking. Jack and Bo exchanged glances as they watched his jaunty steps. With a gesture, Jack asked, "This guy's a bit crazy, isn't he?" "I think so too," Bo replied with a look. They communicated through subtle glances and gestures, an old habit from their time in the Thieves' Guild. "Nice weather," Ingrid commented. "It's freezing out here," Jack replied, pouting. Normally, he would flatter his opponent to lull them into a false sense of security, but Ingrid was so disarmed that Jack felt instinctively rebellious. This guy was something else. Of course it's cold, it's the last season of the year. Winter was harsh, but one mustn't be deceived by its severity and miss its charm. Relaxing the body wasn't as simple as just thinking it. Images of Jackson's demonstration floated through his mind. And overlaid upon them was the image of the half-blood elven assassin. To relax the body, the mind had to relax first. Mental burden, threats, and anxiety. Ingrid discarded all of it. In that relaxed state of mind, he repeatedly recalled the half-blood elf throwing a whistling dagger. In truth, it wasn't much different from today's repetitions. What did he learn from defeat? What had he learned in countless life-and-death scenarios? He had passed the stage where he had to gamble his life to gain something. He repeatedly asked himself countless questions. With a suitably relaxed body and mind, his gait felt strangely fluid. He walked, but the solemnity of patrolling duty was absent. Before he knew it, he was in the market. "Hey, squad leader, what's making you so happy?" Jack asked, stopping in his tracks. He wasn't genuinely curious, his subtle shifts in posture showed he was preparing something. Bo also adjusted his steps, both moving into positions to close in. They subtly angled their bodies to obscure the view and poised themselves to draw their weapons at any moment. Ingrid, keeping both of them in his peripheral vision, steadied his breathing once. And then he moved. With the tip of his foot, he tapped Jack's shin. Though he thought his body and mind were relaxed, his movements were more precise than ever. It was an uncanny, perfectly timed kick, leaving his opponent with no chance to react. Thud. Ah! Jack doubled over, clutching his shin. Ingrid, with light, almost playful steps, pressed down on Jack's head with his left hand and brought his knee up. Smack! The sound of dough being slapped echoed. Jack's head snapped back up, his nose bridge broken and face covered in blood. "You bastard, I'm not selling at that price." The move had been a beat faster than planned. It was an instinctive action, unrelated to the plan they had laid out for today. It wasn't intentional, his body had simply acted on its own. It doesn't matter, does it? Ingrid didn't care. It felt as though he had taken a drug that made his mind hazy while flooding his body with euphoria. Even if he had consumed actual drugs, it wouldn't have mattered. His body felt that light. What the? Bo's startled reaction was clear. Ingrid's hand was already reaching for Bo's nape, catching him off guard. TCH. Bo pulled his neck back, just as Ingrid had expected. Whenever he moved to exploit the element of surprise, Bo always reacted in one predictable way. Having seen that pattern more than 5 times now, Ingrid was thoroughly familiar with it. Instead of his extended left hand, he planted his left foot firmly and twisted his body in the opposite direction. Using his left foot as the pivot, he spun, not to face Bo directly but to turn sideways while extending his right hand. In an instant, his arm's reach extended, and his right hand connected with Bo's retreating face. The touch was not the end of it. Boom! The impact of the punch echoed like a drum tearing apart. Ingrid's fist, charged with strength, speed, and focus, shattered Bo's face. Gah! Clutching his face, Bo stumbled back several steps. Ingrid calmly turned his body back around. Perhaps he had started a bit too early, but that didn't matter. Even on a day that repeats itself, events do not always unfold the same way. Anything could change. Ingrid understood that better than anyone. His gaze shifted to the half-blood elf. Though still wrapped in rags, the elf's hand moved. From below to above. A beam of light streaked forth, following the motion of the elf's right hand. Ingrid had no defensive measures prepared for it. Yet. It doesn't matter, does it? Time seemed to slow. For Ingrid, this was the second time he experienced such a phenomenon. This was the moment when concentration broke through its limits, a crack in time often encountered by those at the pinnacle of genius. The same sensation had shone through during his final battle against the mustached soldier in Aspin's last war. It was happening again now. Of course, Ingrid wasn't fully aware of it. His mind remained half entranced. That half-dazed state, burning concentration, blade-sharp senses, and the audacity of a beast. Together, they allowed him to see the beam of light and predict its destination. Can I dodge it? No, there wasn't enough time. The fleeting crack in time closed as Ingrid's brain spun at high speed and reached an answer. Thwack! Screech! He blocked with his arm. The blade of light pierced his left arm, shielding his heart. The whistling dagger emitted a shrill noise as it buried into his forearm, followed by a surge of pain. The heavy impact and searing ache from the blade radiated through his arm. The pain felt distant, almost numbing. The chaos around him faded to a faint murmur. Seeing the attack made him want to have it. Having it made him see. Ingrid's eyes could now trace the dagger's trajectory, allowing him to block it. He raised his head to face the enemy. The half-blood elf had discarded his rags and was relentlessly moving both hands. He was like a living, rapid-fire crossbow, or fiercer still. Ingrid had failed to dodge the first attack, but now he could evade. He tracked the movement of the elf's hands and predicted the trajectory of the incoming light beams. Whoosh! 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 Two were evaded perfectly, and one grazed his cheek. The whistling daggers produced a peculiar harmony as they sliced through the air. Ingrid pulled the dagger from his forearm. Though blood poured from his wound, it wasn't debilitating. The area struck wasn't the one his opponent had aimed for, but one Ingrid had deliberately chosen to block with. Thanks to that, he had a gash on his arm, but it didn't hinder his movements. The leather armor on his forearm had also served its purpose. You bastard! The half-blood elf, now visibly enraged, closed the distance. Even as he advanced, he continued unleashing beams of light from his concealed stash. Dodging every one was impossible. Or perhaps he could have held out longer, if today had been like any other. But today was different. Before Ingrid realized it, Rotten had crept up behind him. Rotten shoved Ingrid. Thud! And that was the end of it. 3 daggers sang through the air, striking Ingrid, one in the heart, another in the side, and the last in the neck. Agonizing pain surged through him. Ingrid's body slowly crumbled. Forcing himself to kneel on one knee, he felt a searing warmth rise from deep within his throat. Unable to hold it back, he opened his mouth, spilling bloody foam. Ah! Only then did the surrounding screams pierce his ears. His hazy mind returned to clarity, and the pain hit him in full force. The half-blood elf assassin approached the fallen Ingrid. His expression was anything but pleasant. You! He uttered a single word, then fell silent. A persistent lover never spares its prey. But he didn't continue speaking. No, he couldn't. The assassin's gaze fell on Ingrid's face. This bastard! His eyes bulged with fury, like a toad filled with venom. Ingrid was laughing. Heh, heh. Even as he spat bloody foam, he laughed. The elf mistook the laugh for mockery, but Ingrid harbored no such intent. As he neared death, he thought. Only 7 times. Today had only repeated 7 times. Yet it wasn't just a breakthrough he had glimpsed, it was a path far beyond that. Only 7 times. No, it wasn't just only. Because he had known neither despair nor resignation, focusing solely on tomorrow, this was possible. An unremarkable talent created a tireless human. That endless effort allowed him to grasp the fringes of genius. It wasn't a miracle. Miracles didn't exist. This was a reward for persisting through countless repeated days without succumbing to despair or defeat. One day, in the repeated today, Ingrid believed he would bring it to an end. This crazy bastard. Thwack! The elf thrust a long blade into Ingrid's throat once more. And that was the end. The moment of death. As darkness consumed the world, Ingrid saw the boatman riding the river. Hee. The boatman laughed at him again. Ingrid couldn't wait to see the boatman next time. What kind of expression would that mocking laugh take then? Good morning. Morning came, and Ingrid woke once more. Rising with ease, he felt renewed. He hadn't mastered it perfectly, but he had learned how to throw whistling daggers. Not flawlessly, but he had also learned the basics of a monk's calisthenics from Odin. Freezing cold out here. What's so good about it? I had a great dream. A truly, utterly wonderful dream. It had been a hazy day, one where he wandered in a trance. That today. Ingrid had caught a glimpse of a life with talent. And he was deeply satisfied. At the same time, he saw the path forward, the way to surpass the wall blocking his path. Chapter 59, Dagger Throwing Technique. Chapter 59, Dagger Throwing Technique. Incrid took a quarrel to his side during his 8th attempt at today's events. The bolt pierced through his ribs and tore into his organs. This is unexpected. It happened after he had dodged all the whistling daggers and kicked Rotten, who had attacked him from behind. In that brief moment of vulnerability, the bolt came flying. Dodging it was impossible. They were thorough in their preparation. Pulling the bolt out would likely worsen the injury. When he looked up, he saw the grotesque face of a mixed-blood fairy looming before him. Were all mixed bloods this hideous? He had no idea. This was the first time he'd encountered such a being in his life. He knew most of them weren't treated well. "You're unusually perceptive, aren't you?" The fairy spoke from above, clearly enjoying the moment. "I get that a lot." "Huh?" Incrid responded while steadying his breath. He calculated the fairy's position and distance in his mind, preparing for one last desperate move. Ping! In a flash, Incrid drew a broad-bladed dagger and thrust it upward. The blade, known as a guard sword, grazed the fairy's cheek with a sharp zing. The fairy tilted its head sideways, dodging, and then kicked Incrid in the abdomen. Thud! Ooh! Instead of a scream, a groan escaped him. The arrowhead lodged in his guts, twisted painfully. The agony was unbearable, worse than anything he'd experienced while moving. His vision blurred white from the pain. Going somewhere. The fairy was efficient and sharp, giving Incrid little time to suffer. When the blade slit his throat, Incrid closed his eyes. On the next repetition of the day, Rotten, Jack, and Bo attacked alongside the fairy. Though Incrid was overwhelmed, he managed to kill Jack and Bo and sever the fairy's arm. The final blow, however, was once again to his heart, this time from a concealed stiletto at the fairy's waist. After 9 grueling repetitions of this day, the 10th dawn finally broke. After completing his exercises with Audin, Incrid met Jackson, continuing his relentless preparation. Each day was crucial. Nothing could be wasted, so Incrid gave his all once again. Mind checking my stance? Indifferent to any notion of equivalent exchange, Incrid demonstrated his dagger-throwing technique to provoke insight from Jackson. The skill he now wielded was far beyond what he had when he first learned it. It was a technique he'd refined by clinging to the edges of his talent. His movements now had precision and power unmatched by his earlier attempts. Incrid activated a single point of focus, relaxing his body before unleashing his full strength in a single explosive motion. His hand sliced through the air, and the dagger shot forward with a wheeze. It wasn't fast enough to be called a flash of light, but it was several times quicker than before. Your arm and hand act as the launcher, utilizing your body's elasticity. I understand that well. Do you notice anything lacking in my stance? Incrid was stunned when he saw Jackson gape, his jaw dropping wide open for the first time. This was the usually stoic, composed squadmate, one who rarely showed any emotion. Yet here he was, visibly shaken. The moment passed quickly, and Jackson's face returned to its calm, neutral state. Jackson? Where did you learn that? On the battlefield. I saw someone with a phenomenal dagger-throwing technique. And you learned just by watching? More or less. Jackson echoed Incrid's words like a parrot. It was understandable, this wasn't a skill that could be mastered through simple practice. This was beyond basic training. Without innate talent, learning such a technique was nonsensical. Jackson understood this and was shocked. The squad leader's recent improvement in skill had been noticeable, but this was on another level entirely. Jackson, after observing Incrid for a moment, offered his advice. That's good enough. There's no need to delve deeper into this technique. However, since your dagger has some weight, it's better to focus on imparting a sense of heaviness rather than lightness. Jackson chose his words carefully and shared them without reservation. Incrid nodded. It's called the explosive blade technique. Jackson introduced the name abruptly. Though not inclined toward sharing knowledge freely, Jackson wasn't stingy about teaching useful skills. Incrid adjusted his posture. He had long ingrained in himself the discipline to listen, even learning from Krang how to express attentiveness fully. Listening itself was an art he had mastered. Seeing this, Jackson felt an unusual sense of joy. Who else would treat dagger throwing with such seriousness? Had Incrid not shown such dedication, Jackson might have disregarded him as squad leader altogether. Years ago, a legendary assassin named Geoga developed the basic framework for this technique. There's speculation that he was inspired by Leonesis Oniak's 5 sword styles, but the details are unclear. The technique had history. Ingrid's focus deepened as he absorbed every word. Jackson explained further, offering insights into its origins and potential. The explosive blade technique wasn't limited to throwing daggers, it encompassed all types of projectile weaponry. Unprompted, Jackson even mentioned the infamous whistle daggers. There's a throwing dagger called the whistle dagger. If you ever encounter one, avoid it at all costs. They're incredibly difficult to counter. The reason Gyoga's explosive blade technique is named like that is directly tied to the whistle daggers. He elaborated further. The whistle daggers were constructed with layered blades. Gyoga's ultimate goal had been to craft a dagger so thin it required only a single layer. Such a blade wouldn't whistle in flight, it would be completely silent. How many layers was that? Ingrid instinctively recalled the whistle daggers thrown by the mixed-blood fairy. When one embedded itself in his arm, he'd seen it clearly, 3 layers. Hey, isn't today your shift? Bo appeared outside the barracks, calling for Ingrid. Ingrid had been so engrossed that he didn't notice his shift was about to start. Ah, I forgot. Let's go. This is the shift we're on today, right? Yes, it's market patrol, replied Bo. I know. You're part of the scouting unit, Ingrid replied casually before turning to Jackson. I've learned a lot, he said. Have you? Jackson didn't think of himself as overly talkative, but he had to admit that he always seemed to talk more than usual in front of the squad leader. Even if he only said what was necessary, it was still a lot. Did I go too far with the whistling blade? Why did I bring that up? Looking back, it made sense. It was relevant. It was because of the stance Ingrid had demonstrated. The throwing technique looks the same. Although Gyoga's blade technique wasn't strictly a throwing art, there were basic forms to it. But the stance Ingrid had shown earlier was a textbook example of the whistling blade, as if someone had guided him. Jackson wouldn't have known it, but the person who had taught Ingrid that stance was none other than himself. Let's head this way. Ingrid unilaterally changed their patrol route. Wait, the orders were to patrol the market. We'll get reprimanded for this, protested Jack. I'll take responsibility, Ingrid said firmly. He was the squad leader, a recently promoted senior soldier, and a talent coveted by both the 1st Company and the Border Defense Corps. At 30, he was a late bloomer who had just started garnering attention. The 2 soldiers from the scouting unit had no choice but to follow his lead. I said I'll take responsibility. We can take it easy for once. Let's go. Ingrid strode ahead, expecting them to follow. Leaving the patrol route is a disciplinary offense, Bo murmured, glancing at Jack. Jack gestured rapidly. What do we do? I don't know. Bo shook his head. Even without looking, Ingrid could sense their whispered conversation. But no amount of discussion would change things. Some situations couldn't be helped. If the superior officer said to jump, you jumped. And right now, he was the superior. The assassin had prepared the place, time, and people. But did he need to follow their script? I'll change the location. There was no reason to step into the assassin's carefully prepared stage. This was the answer Ingrid reached after some deliberation. He moved as he pleased, wandering near the city gates rather than the bustling urban areas. Jack and Bo were clearly uneasy. They tried persuading him to head toward the market, but Ingrid remained resolute. After about 30 minutes of wandering, Ingrid suddenly stopped. Who? Why are we stopping? The pair, who had walked 2 steps past him, turned back, puzzled. By now, they had given up on entering the market and had secretly left coded signals in various places along the way. It was time. Ingrid quietly observed them before asking, "Why did you do it?" Jack and Bo exchanged bewildered glances. "What's he talking about?" "Beats me." "Who?" Bo asked, puzzled. "I said, why did you do it?" "What are you even saying?" "Speak clearly." Jack snapped irritably. "I've thought about it several times but can't figure it out. What's the point of espionage at your level? Is it for Krona? Money?" At his sudden question, Jack and Bo instinctively recoiled. Then, after an awkward exchange of glances, Bo scratched his head and spoke. "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, are you seriously accusing us of being spies?" Jack growled. "When you retreat and place your hand on your sword hilt, doesn't that strike you as a feeble excuse? At Ingrid's words, the two exchanged another glance. And then, sheeing. Both drew their weapons. Bo wielded a thin stiletto-like dagger, while Jack held a thicker short sword. Ingrid didn't move. Guess he's sharper than we thought, Jack muttered. Looks like you'll have to die here, Bo added. The plan had gone awry, but their objective was clear. After a brief nod, the two lunged forward. Ingrid unsheathed his long sword with a smooth motion. Sheeing. The blade gleamed in the sunlight as he took a wide step forward, drawing a semicircle with his sword. The sweeping strike forced Jack and Bo to back off instinctively. But Ingrid didn't stop there. As the momentum of his swing created an opening, Bo seized the chance and charged in. He was a soldier known for his agility, and he propelled himself forward, closing the gap in an instant. Ingrid seemed vulnerable, shifting his weight to his right as he gripped the longsword with both hands. Just as Bo's short sword reached striking distance. Thunk! A blade suddenly emerged from Ingrid's left armpit, piercing Bo's throat. It was a mercenary-style technique called shadow thrust, involving a feint to draw the opponent close before striking with a concealed blade. Bo, overly reliant on his reflexes, had closed the distance too eagerly, playing right into Ingrid's hands. With a gurgling sound, Bo collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Damn it, that's brutal, Jack muttered, pale-faced. He neither had the will to fight nor the courage to flee. So, why did you do it? Why do you care, you bastard? Jack spat, defiant to the end. Ingrid didn't see a need for mercy. Their fight ended quickly. A deceptive feint with the longsword turned into a horizontal slash, carving a deep wound into Jack's side. Ah, damn it, Jack cursed before collapsing. Ingrid stood still, catching his breath with his sword planted in the ground. Not long after, reinforcements arrived. A bolt flew toward him with a sharp whiz. Ingrid tilted his head to dodge, spotting a hesitant Rotten and a cloaked assassin. Leaving his sword embedded in the ground, he asked, "Are you all coming at once?" A one-on-one fight seemed out of the question. Another bolt was aimed his way. Ingrid exhaled sharply, relaxing his entire body. His arms dangled like pendulums before his right hand snapped upward, flinging a dagger. Whiz! The thrown blade struck Rotten square in the forehead. The half-fairy assassin beside him flinched momentarily. Interesting, Ingrid muttered, echoing the assassin's thoughts. Chapter 60, just 10 times. It's fun? That's what I should be saying. You're really amusing. The half-blood fairy draped in rags licked its lips with a flick of its tongue, arms drooping limply. From beneath the rags, pale white hands peeked out. It was evident at a glance, this was a preparatory stance. The moment those hands moved, a chilling whistling sound would resonate. Don't look at the projectile, it'll be too late. Watch the hands instead. Jackson's method for countering the whistling throwing knives was also the key to handling anyone skilled with throwing weapons. Catching a flying arrow with your eyes alone is almost impossible. Unless you're truly a knight, it's extremely difficult. However, even if you're not a knight, there's a way to avoid incoming arrows. It's called the selection eye technique. Even if the hands are cleverly hidden, it's impossible to completely obscure the movements of the arms. Focus on the enemy in front of you. Watch their hands and arms closely. Then take in their entire body and dodge accordingly. That was the essence of the technique. Jackson's calm and precise explanations were easy to absorb. When REM taught something, he relied on action first. He was the type to lead with physical demonstration rather than words. Jackson was the opposite. He delivered meticulous explanations first, ensuring intellectual comprehension before moving on to physical practice. Ragnar, on the other hand, was haphazard until something piqued his interest. Once engaged, he combined demonstrations and explanations seamlessly, adapting to the flow. Audin was similar to REM, but his tone carried an almost godly optimism. Perhaps the most frustrating approach of all. You can do it, brother. It's fine, brother. That's not nearly enough to reach the arms of the divine. Does it hurt? Good, you're making progress. Learning gymnastics from him had been anything but easy. But it had paid off handsomely. Now, beneath the shadows of the city wall, where the air was much colder than in the sunlight, Ingrid felt comfortably warm. His body showed no signs of stiffening, thanks to the gymnastics he'd learned from Audin. Even as his thoughts wandered, Ingrid's eyes never left the half-blood fairy. The way to avoid whistling throwing knives was to focus on the fingertips. Hands might move faster than eyes, but it was impossible to hide the motion of an arm in full swing. You track its trajectory, feel it, and see it. If you see it, you can dodge it. He'd done it countless times already. The key now was to keep watching, something Ingrid was doing diligently. His own hands were also hanging loose by his sides. The half-blood fairy mirrored his stance. Though not quite at the level of whistling throwing knives, their throwing techniques were formidable. How do I land a single blow? The half-blood fairy was exhilarated. At first, this had been a dull, routine job, an assignment to kill a mere soldier. Hardly the kind of task to spark interest. The assassin harbored two peculiarities. The first was exploiting an enemy's carelessness to strike their heart. The second was killing elite warriors head-on. Both were passions of his. Initially, this job seemed likely to require the first. But now? This is going to be fun. His focus had shifted to the latter. The half-blood fairy kept licking his lips, a habit he had when concentrating deeply. His eye scanned Ingrid for an opening, but none appeared easily. He felt it clearly in his mind. No matter how he threw his knives, the opponent would dodge them. But that was fine. You're expecting me to throw the knives, aren't you? The opponent had somehow seen through his plan, countering it with the simplest of measures, changing the location. Things had gone awry. 3 people were already dead, and while the commotion had drawn no one yet, the original assassination site, a bustling marketplace, was now useless. Bustling places slow perception. 2 disposable accomplices, Jack and Bo, were meant to create a distraction with their trivial antics. There was also a crossbowman hidden, a man named Rotten following in secret. All those preparations unraveled with a mere change of location. Now, there were no buildings to hide behind. Before the mission even started, 2 fools were dead, and the crossbowman had been eliminated by an unexpected knife throw. Did he plan all this? Once again, the fairy licked his lips. His concentration had peaked, leaving his lips perpetually dry. He retraced the target's actions up to this point, trying to discern his intentions. Yes, he planned it all. He had calculated everything. The how didn't matter, the outcome did. Jack and Bo were dealt with, and the crossbowman had been swiftly dispatched. Impressive. The opponent's calculations, methods, and precision were flawless. He's in the same line of work as me. Or so the fairy thought. But it was a mistake. The opponent had simply read and dismantled his assassination tactics head-on. Even with leaked information, this level of response was indicative of someone with extensive experience in such matters. So, what can I use now? He still had options. There were 3 poisons hidden in his clothing. On his back was his specialized weapon, a long needle the length of a forearm. Called the needle, it was one of the weapons favored by fairies alongside knives. Draw and thrust. That was all it took. Only one target had ever survived this method, a frog, to be exact. A damn frog. Why are you so disgustingly ugly? That insane frog had casually insulted his appearance. The half-blood fairy had a deep-seated inferiority complex about his looks. Fairies were meant to be beautiful, but as a half-blood, he had been denied that blessing. Since that day, every job he completed ended with him piercing his target's heart, an act now ingrained as habit. He licked his lips again as he thought of the frog. Killing his opponent by splitting their heart seemed easy enough. Close the distance, then pierce him with the needle in one strike. While the opponent might have skill with a sword, that only applied in direct combat. The fairy trusted in his secret techniques. Now, how would he close the distance? Ingrid's senses screamed alarms of danger as if they were going mad. How many do you have? Ingrid addressed the half-fairy, keeping him engaged in conversation, then raised his voice toward the front. The fairy shrugged, as if to answer what was likely a question about the number of daggers in his possession. I only have 2, the fairy lied, having already wetted his lips multiple times in preparation. I've got 1, Ingrid responded honestly, despite knowing everything. Seems like I have the upper hand, doesn't it? That's just what you think. The daggers Ingrid carried were a secret weapon he'd coerced out of Creyas since morning. He'd asked for something thin and light, and Creyas had delivered. The result was a soldier who had been forced to give up a carving knife and Ingrid gaining a throwing knife, though its blade had been sharpened so excessively it was now as short as a finger. You're quite amusing, aren't you? Muttered the elf. Ingrid agreed silently. The tension coursing through his body burned like fire. A single misstep, even a blink, could allow death to tighten its grip on his throat. Yet it exhilarated him, the anticipation of measuring his skills against an opponent. Pitting his own moves against theirs, feeling the thrill of competition. He felt his heart fill with a fierce desire to win, a sensation he hadn't easily experienced before. In the past, had there ever been a moment to even think about winning? He'd been too preoccupied with simply surviving, clawing his way out of death's grasp. But now? Today, repeated over and over, an endless cycle of walking the line between life and death had changed more than just his swordsmanship. Once, he had been unable to entertain thoughts of victory against a skilled opponent. But now? I can win. Not only did he want to win, but he believed he could. It was a shift in mindset, a newfound confidence. The fairy selected the most rational, efficient, and effective option available. This is inside the city. Won't patrols come by this way soon? He was right. Time was on Ingrid's side. Once the patrols arrived, it would be over. Facing him would not only expose his disguise but also make survival near impossible. His back was damp with sweat, evidence of his tension. When did he get this strong? His movement slowed as he kept his gaze locked on Ingrid, his steps cautious. Move carefully. That bastard can't throw daggers. Whistle. For daggers sliced through the air, the high-pitched sound ringing loud. Even as Ingrid hurled his blade, his eyes never left the fairy. Not once did he blink. Because of that, he could track the trajectory of the incoming blades. He instantly dropped into a low position, feet apart, body almost prone as his hands touched the ground. The whistling blade sliced through the space where his head and chest had been moments ago. This sequence unfolded in the span of a half-breath. During the remaining half-breath, the fairy acted again. After the first wave of 4 blades, he sent another 2, targeting Ingrid's head and thighs. Instinctively, Ingrid rolled to the side. Thud! The daggers embedded themselves into the ground. Rolling onto his feet, Ingrid immediately scanned for his opponent. Missing the fairy's movements now would spell the end. His eyes darted, but his gaze failed to find him. The elf was nowhere to be seen. His instincts, preoccupied with finding a position for a counterattack, had overlooked the fairy's approach. In that moment, the fairy was already closing the distance, low to the ground. His ears twitched, alerting him to the sound of footsteps striking the earth. Ingrid's eyes finally caught sight of the fairy, just a few steps away. Using the fluttering cloth to distract and closing the gap, the fairy executed his plan. His opponent likely hadn't anticipated such an approach. His assumptions proved correct. Ingrid's face showed pure surprise. Yet, even then, Ingrid moved. Ping! Bastard, the fairy cursed internally, conveniently ignoring his own earlier lie. The fairy, focused entirely on closing the distance. 2 steps away. He reached for his weapon as Ingrid desperately drew his long sword. But before he could ready it, the fairy's short, needle-like blade plunged toward Ingrid's heart. Clang! Crack! What? Blocked. The fairy was shocked. This strike shouldn't have been stopped. It was his trump card, a fatal blow. But it was blocked because Ingrid had seen this exact move in his 9th death. Instead of drawing his long sword, Ingrid had deflected the needle-like blade with the guard sword he had drawn earlier, turning the strike away. Though not a perfect execution of the defensive technique, it was effective enough. The broken blade fragment scattered as Ingrid abandoned the guard sword and fully unsheathed his long sword. In one seamless motion, he raised it high and brought it down with force. The fairy barely managed to raise his weapon to block. Clang! The longsword shattered the needle-like blade, completing its arc and splitting the elf's face in 2. The grotesque visage of the elf was no longer recognizable, cleaved apart in one decisive strike. Ingrid exhaled, releasing the breath he'd been holding. After retrieving his sword, he reflected. 10, just 10 times. That's all it took to end today's cycle. The shortest iteration of this endless day he had experienced so far.